A mountain man finds a beautiful nun being sold and makes her question her faith. The small convent stood quietly at the edge of a mountain town, surrounded by tall pine trees and long stretches of open land. It was an old building made of stone, and time had left its marks on the walls. Cracks ran along the corners. The wooden doors creaked, and during winter the cold air found its way inside no matter how tightly the windows were closed. But for the sisters who lived there, the convent was more than a building. It was their home, their shelter, and their purpose. Among the sisters was a young woman named Elena. She had been living there for many years, so long that she could barely remember what life outside those walls felt like. Her days followed the same quiet routine. She woke up before sunrise, joined the morning prayers, helped with cleaning, cooking, and caring for the small garden behind the convent. She spoke softly, walked gently, and lived with discipline. To anyone who saw her, she looked calm and devoted. Elena had come to the convent when she was still very young. Her childhood had not been easy. She had lost her parents within a short time, and there had been no relatives able to take care of her. A local priest had helped her find shelter at the convent, where the sisters welcomed her with kindness. At that time, the convent felt like the safest place in the world. It gave her food, protection, and a quiet life away from uncertainty. As she grew older, staying there felt like the natural path. She learned that serving others and living simply was a way to thank God for giving her another chance at life. Over time, she stopped questioning her choices. Obedience became a habit. Silence became comfort. She believed that her duty was to trust the decisions made by those in charge. But the convent itself was slowly facing problems. The town nearby was small, and fewer people came to visit or donate. Repairs were needed. The roof leaked during heavy rain, and the heating system barely worked in winter. The older sisters worried quietly, but they tried not to show their fear. They believed that things would improve, that help would come somehow. Because the convent did not manage its finances directly, outside administrators handled many of the decisions. These men visited only a few times a year, bringing updates, making plans, and sometimes giving instructions that the sisters had to follow. The sisters trusted them even when the decisions felt sudden or unclear. Obedience had always been part of their life. Elena did not think much about these matters. She focused on her daily duties. She spent time caring for the small chapel, arranging flowers, cleaning the wooden benches, and lighting candles. She also helped in the kitchen and often assisted the older sisters who needed extra support. People in town knew her as someone gentle and polite. When she went to collect supplies, she spoke little, but always smiled. Her presence carried a quiet peace that others could feel. Still, deep inside, there was a part of Elena that had never experienced the wider world. She had never traveled far, never made her own big decisions, and never lived outside a place where every hour was planned. But because she had lived this way for so long, she did not see it as something missing. It was simply her life. One cold morning, the administrators arrived for their scheduled visit. The sisters gathered in the main hall, standing respectfully as the men spoke about the convent's financial difficulties. Donations were decreasing, expenses were increasing, and changes would have to be made. The conversation was formal and serious. Some sisters looked worried, but no one questioned the decisions. They trusted that whatever was arranged would be for the good of the convent. After the meeting, Elena was asked to stay behind. One of the administrators spoke to her in a calm but firm voice. He explained that she had been selected for a special transfer. A wealthy sponsor from another region had agreed to support the convent financially. In return, Elena would be sent there to assist with religious and service work. The man described it as an opportunity. He said her dedication and discipline made her the right choice. The support from the sponsor would help repair the convent and provide stability for the other sisters. Elena listened quietly. She did not ask many questions. Obedience had always guided her life. If this was what she was asked to do, then it must be the right path. Still, when she returned to her room that evening, she felt something unfamiliar. It was not fear exactly, but a quiet uncertainty. She realized she knew nothing about the place she would be going. She did not know the people, the work, or how long she would stay. For the first time in years, her routine felt uncertain. That night, she prayed longer than usual, asking for strength and patience. She told herself that service meant accepting whatever was given. She reminded herself that her life had never belonged to her alone. It was meant for something greater. In the following days, preparations began. The other sisters helped her pack the few belongings she owned. Some of them looked sad, but they spoke encouraging words. They said she had been chosen for an important responsibility. The town market was busy on the morning she went to collect final supplies before her departure. People moved between stalls, selling vegetables, tools, and handmade goods. Elena walked quietly through the crowd, her simple clothing making her stand out among the noise and color. Not far away, a tall man stood beside a cart loaded with neatly cut firewood. His name was Daniel. Daniel lived alone in the mountains, far from town. Years earlier, he had chosen a quiet life after losing his wife. Since then, he had kept to himself, speaking little and avoiding unnecessary contact with others. Nature, work, and solitude had become his world. He came to town only when he needed to sell wood or buy basic supplies. That morning, while waiting near the market square, Daniel noticed a conversation taking place between two men dressed in formal clothing. They were speaking about arrangements, payments, and the transfer of a young nun to a sponsor who expected her arrival soon. Their words sounded more like a business deal than a religious assignment. Daniel did not usually pay attention to other people's matters, but something about the tone of their conversation felt wrong. When he looked up and saw Elena standing nearby, waiting quietly with her small bag, he noticed how calm and unaware she seemed. She trusted completely. The men spoke about her as if she were part of an agreement rather than a person with a choice. Daniel felt an unexpected discomfort. For years he had trained himself not to get involved in anything that did not concern him. The world had its problems, and he had chosen to stay away from them. But as he watched Elena standing there, alone in the middle of a decision she had not truly made for herself, something stirred inside him. It was a feeling he had not experienced in a long time, and without realizing it, for the first time in many years, Daniel did not turn away. Daniel could not shake the image of the young nun standing quietly in the crowded market. Her small figure, calm expression, and trusting demeanor were unlike anything he had seen in the town before. For a man who had spent years avoiding other people's business, it was strange that he felt so strongly about her situation. But something deep inside told him that she needed help, and that he might be the only one who could give it. He moved closer to the two men who were arranging her transfer. Their voices were low but harsh, filled with terms like contract, payment, and conditions. To them, this was a simple transaction, a matter of business, not faith or care. Daniel listened carefully, and with each word his unease grew. He realized that the so-called sponsor was someone who cared little about the well-being of anyone. The arrangement was not about helping her serve God or the community. It was about control and profit. She listened politely, nodding slightly, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She believed that obedience was a virtue, that anyone in authority knew what was best for her. It had always been this way in the convent. Rules and instructions were followed without question. Her life had been shaped by trust in those who guided her. But now, she was about to step into something she did not understand, and Daniel knew it. For several minutes, he stood silently, weighing his options. Interfering in town matters was not safe for him. People in the town respected power, money, and authority, and he had no desire to be caught in unnecessary conflict. Yet, the thought of leaving her in the hands of strangers, powerless and unprepared, gnawed at him. He remembered the pain of helplessness he had felt when his wife had passed away. He had been alone, and there had been nothing he could do to change it. Seeing Elena now, he felt that same helplessness. But this time, he could act. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm as he addressed the men. "She will stay with me until proper arrangements are made," he said. The words surprised them, and they turned to look at him. He did not introduce himself, did not explain his background. He only made his stance clear. One of the men, tall and sharp-eyed, frowned. "Who are you to interfere?" he asked. "This is a formal arrangement. You cannot just take her away." Daniel did not flinch. "I am responsible for her safety now. Until you can guarantee she will be treated properly, she stays with me. I am giving her a safe place to stay." The market fell quiet around them. Passers-by paused, curious about the confrontation. Elena watched silently, unsure what to do. She had never been spoken to in such a direct way outside the convent, and the boldness of this stranger surprised her. The men muttered among themselves. They did not expect anyone to intervene, especially someone as ordinary as Daniel. But Daniel's calm and firm presence left no room for argument. Finally, after a tense moment, they stepped back, realizing that continuing the discussion would attract unwanted attention from the crowd. Daniel turned to Elena. "Come with me," he said gently. "You don't need to be afraid. I will make sure you are safe." She hesitated for a moment, unsure what to do. Following a stranger was not something she had ever imagined, but something in Daniel's voice felt trustworthy. It was neither commanding nor harsh. It was simply clear and caring. Slowly, she nodded. They left the market together, moving quietly through narrow streets toward the edge of town. Elena clutched her small bag tightly, feeling a mix of curiosity and nervousness. She had no idea where they were going, yet she felt strangely calm. For the first time, she realized that someone had seen her as a person, not just a duty or a transaction. The journey to Daniel's cabin took longer than she expected. The path wound through trees, over small streams, and up gentle slopes. Elena had seen mountains before, from a distance, but she had never walked among them. She noticed the birds, the rustling leaves, and the sound of water moving over stones. It was a world unlike anything she had known in the convent. Daniel did not speak much. He allowed her to take in the surroundings at her own pace. Every so often he would point out a plant or an animal, explaining quietly without drawing too much attention. His presence was steady, comforting, and non-intrusive. When they finally arrived at his cabin, Elena's eyes widened. The cabin was simple but warm. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and the air smelled of wood and earth. Inside, everything was orderly. A small kitchen with neatly stacked firewood, a table with a few chairs, and a small area with beds and blankets. It was clear that Daniel lived simply, but he had created a safe and peaceful home for himself. "Welcome," Daniel said, gesturing toward the cabin. "This is your space. You will not need to worry here." Elena looked around, feeling a strange mix of relief and curiosity. She realized how sheltered her life had been. She had never had a place where she could simply exist without schedules, rules, or constant supervision. The quiet of the cabin, the openness of the surroundings, and the presence of someone who did not demand obedience It was overwhelming but strangely freeing. Over the next few days, Daniel helped her settle in. He showed her how to prepare simple meals, how to fetch water from a nearby stream, and how to care for the small garden outside. He never pushed her to do anything beyond what she felt comfortable with. His respect for her choices was unlike anything she had ever known. Elena, in turn, began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. The sound of wind through the trees, the changing colors of the sky, the feeling of warm sunlight on her face. Life outside the convent was slower, quieter, and more alive than she had imagined. As they worked side by side, a subtle bond formed. It was not a bond of romance, nor was it dependent on words. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding that both had lived lives shaped by loss, duty, and loneliness. Despite her growing comfort, Elena could not ignore the questions forming in her mind. Was obedience the only path to goodness? Was following rules always the same as serving God? Could she think for herself and still honor her faith? Daniel noticed her silence at times, but never forced her to speak. Instead, he answered her questions when she asked, shared stories of his life when she was curious, and allowed her to explore her own thoughts freely. His presence was gentle yet firm, and it slowly made Elena aware that there was more to life than the walls she had always known. One evening, as they sat by the small fire in the cabin, Elena finally spoke. "I have always believed that following rules was the same as following God, but now I do not know. I feel confused." Daniel nodded, understanding her struggle. "Faith is not about fear or obedience," he said softly. "It is about choice. It is about understanding and caring, not just following instructions. You have the right to think and decide for yourself." Elena listened, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. For the first time in years, she realized that she could make decisions on her own, and that doing so did not mean betraying her faith. Days turned into weeks. Elena continued to adjust to her new life, learning skills she had never imagined, and noticing the beauty in the world around her. Daniel's quiet support gave her space to grow, and she began to see herself as more than just a servant of rules. And though the outside world was still uncertain and sometimes intimidating, Elena felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of freedom, a sense of choice, and a quiet trust that she could face whatever came next. Daniel had stepped into her life as a stranger, yet he became the first person to show her that life could be different. Not better or worse, just different. And in that difference, there was room for her to discover herself, her faith, and her purpose in ways she had never imagined. Life in the mountains was completely different from anything Elena had ever known. The first few days in Daniel's cabin had been quiet and filled with small routines, but as time passed, she began to notice the deeper rhythms of the world around her. The sound of the wind through the pine trees became a kind of music. The river nearby sang as it flowed over stones, and the bird songs in the morning reminded her that life went on even without schedules, bells, or rules. Daniel continued his simple, steady ways, showing Elena how to tend to the cabin and the small garden outside. She learned how to plant vegetables, water the plants, and harvest them when they were ready. She learned to chop firewood carefully, to start a small fire without hesitation, and even to fish in the nearby stream. Daniel never rushed her, never demanded obedience, and never corrected her harshly. His patience was unlike anything she had experienced in the convent, where every mistake, however small, was noted and guided with strictness. At first, Elena had felt awkward and unsure. Every step outside the convent had been foreign. She had never cooked over a real fire, never carried a bucket of water from a river, and had never walked alone through dense woods. The work was tiring, and she often wondered if she would ever become competent in this new life. But Daniel encouraged her gently. "Take your time," he said. "Time daily. There is no rush here. You can learn at your own pace." Elena began to notice small things about Daniel that made her feel comfortable. He never asked about her past in the convent unless she brought it up. He never judged her, even though he could see that her life had been unusual and sheltered. Most importantly, he treated her as a human being with thoughts, feelings, and the right to make choices, not as someone who existed only to obey or serve. As the days passed, Elena began to experience emotions she had buried for years. She laughed for the first time in a long while, sometimes at small mistakes she made while learning new tasks, sometimes at Daniel's quiet sense of humor. She felt nervous when trying something new, but she also felt proud when she succeeded. Simple things like baking bread that came out golden or seeing vegetables grow in the garden brought her joy. Her thoughts also began to change. Living alone in the mountains with Daniel without the constant structure of the convent forced her to think about her life differently. For years, she had followed rules because she believed they were right. She had not questioned much because obedience had been drilled into her from childhood. But now, she found herself asking questions she had never dared to ask before. "Why do I always have to follow orders?" she thought one morning while collecting water from the stream. "Is serving God only about obedience? Or is there more?" These questions made her uneasy at first. Doubt had always been something to avoid in the convent. But in the mountains, with the sun shining on her face and the wind moving through the trees, doubt did not feel threatening. It felt natural. It felt like a part of understanding life. Daniel noticed the change in her, but never pressed her to speak. Instead, he continued to go about his work, leaving her the space to think and observe. Sometimes they worked side by side in silence, and sometimes they spoke about the small things of life, how to care for the soil, which herbs could be used for medicine, or which birds were migrating in the season. These conversations, simple as they were, helped Elena understand the value of everyday life and the lessons hidden in nature. Elena also began to notice how people in the town had treated her differently. Even during her first few trips for supplies, she had felt like an outsider, someone delicate and fragile. But after spending time with Daniel, learning to manage responsibilities and make small decisions, she felt stronger. Her voice grew steadier, her confidence more apparent, and she started to carry herself differently. The more time she spent outside the convent, the more Elena realized that her life had been very limited. She had learned devotion, discipline, and prayer, but she had never learned to see the world with her own eyes. She had never made choices freely or tested her strength. Living in the mountains was opening doors inside her mind, letting her explore feelings, fears, and hopes she had never admitted to herself before. One day, as they were working in the garden, Daniel paused and looked at her. "You've grown stronger these past weeks," he said. "Not just in body, but in your mind, too. You're learning to take responsibility, to see things clearly. That's important." Elena felt a strange warmth at his words. She had always wanted to serve others and be helpful, but now she realized that understanding herself was just as important as helping anyone else. She began to feel that serving God did not only mean obedience, it could also mean learning to care, to understand, and to make choices wisely. Evenings in the cabin became a time for reflection. After the day's work was done, Elena would sit by the fire, thinking about her life. She remembered her childhood, the pain of losing her parents, and the comfort of the convent. She thought about the other sisters, the life she had left behind, and the rules she had always followed. But she also thought about the freedom she now had, the freedom to learn, to think, to question, and to grow. Sometimes she felt conflicted. She had been taught that questioning too much could lead her away from God. But in the mountains, she began to see that faith was not only about obedience. Faith could also mean love, understanding, and courage. It could mean looking at the world honestly and choosing to act with kindness and wisdom. One evening, while watching the stars from the cabin porch, she spoke quietly to Daniel. "I feel different. I don't know what is right anymore, but I think I am learning something important, something I could not learn in the convent."
Daniel listened without judgment. He simply nodded and said, "It is okay to question."
That is how people grow. Faith is stronger when it survives questions, not when it avoids them. Elena felt a deep sense of relief. No one had ever spoken to her like this. In the convent, questions were sometimes seen as doubts or disobedience. Here, they were respected as part of life. She began to see that her devotion could remain, but it could change, become personal, alive, and meaningful. The bond between Daniel and Elena grew quietly, built on mutual respect and understanding. He never forced her to follow his ways or beliefs. She never demanded guidance or answers from him. Their connection was simple, steady, and honest. Elena began to realize that this bond was teaching her more than the convent ever had. It was teaching her about trust, compassion, and freedom. Days turned into weeks, and Elena found herself feeling stronger and more capable. She had learned to cook, clean, garden, and even care for some of Daniel's animals. She could think for herself, make small decisions, and solve problems without fear. Her heart, once full of quiet obedience, was now alive with awareness, curiosity, and thought. And through it all, she began to notice that her faith was no longer about following rules blindly. It was about understanding herself, caring for others, and finding meaning in her actions. She realized that God's presence could be in the mountains, in the work she did, and in the quiet moments of reflection, just as much as it had been in the convent chapel. For the first time, Elena felt that she was not just a person who obeyed orders. She was someone who could think, choose, and live with purpose. The mountains, the cabin, and Daniel's quiet guidance were helping her discover a new part of herself, a part that was strong, thoughtful, and alive. And though she still respected her past, she knew her future could be different. She was beginning to understand that freedom and faith could exist together, that life could be full of questions and still full of meaning, and that courage sometimes meant stepping into the unknown, even when it was frightening. In those quiet mountain days, Elena was learning what it truly meant to live, to serve, and to believe, not because someone told her to, but because she wanted to, and because she was finally allowed to choose. Weeks turned into months, and Elena's life in the mountains had settled into a new rhythm. Each day brought small tasks, quiet reflection, and subtle lessons about life, faith, and freedom. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of the world beyond the convent walls. She could cook, clean, care for the garden, and help Daniel with the animals. She had discovered that work, even simple work, could bring joy when done with care and attention. Yet, despite the comfort and peace she had found, there remained a part of her heart that was unsettled.